Hello, friends. I'm Kyle Babin, Chair of OM's Professional Concerns and Development Committee, also known as the PCDC. I also serve as Rector of the Church of the Good Shepherd, Rosemont, in the Diocese of Pennsylvania. The PCDC exists to support OM members as they engage in ministry for the sake of the gospel by encouraging healthy working relationships in the church and serving as a pastoral presence for OM members who need support in ministry. You can learn more about us on the OM website, where there is also contact information for our committee members, and I am grateful for their service to OM and to the church. One tangible way of assisting all who serve the church is the implementation of coaching programs for both musicians and clergy. There are usually official mentoring programs for clergy in many dioceses, and OM itself has explored mentoring programs for young musicians. But what would it look like to foster a more widespread coaching program for musicians and clergy? Although there is a subtle distinction between coaching and mentoring, our use today of the term coaching implies that of companions on a journey. The coach ideally has significant experience in ministry and walks alongside the coachee, helping that person become their best self in the particular ministry endeavor to which they have been called. Coaching is above all a relationship of support in the frequently lonely world of ministry. Today, we have three honored guests with us to discuss the advantages of coaching relationships in the church. They are all musicians, and one is also a priest. These experienced panelists will share their varied experiences with coaching in their careers and in ministry. Unfortunately, Marilyn Kaiser, who was initially planning to join us today, is unable to be present because of a medical issue. I spoke with her yesterday and she was doing well and regrets not being able to participate as originally intended, but please keep her in your prayers. In her stead, though, it is a pleasure to welcome Kyle Ritter, who is a former student of Dr. Kaiser's. Mr. Ritter is canon for music at the Cathedral of All Souls in Asheville, North Carolina. He earned both bachelor's and master's degrees in organ and church music from Indiana University, where he was a student of Robert Rayfield and Marilyn Kaiser. He has held various positions of leadership in the American Guild of Organists, and he is a past regional officer and placement advisor for OM. Our second panelist is Rees Roberts. Mr. Roberts is a native of Little Rock, Arkansas, and recently completed studies at Arizona State University, where he studied organ with Kimberly Marshall. He will begin graduate studies at Indiana University in the fall, studying with Jeanette Fishel. Prior to his studies in Arizona, Mr. Roberts served as the organist and choir master of St. Luke's Episcopal Church in North Little Rock, Arkansas. He has been active in RSCM programs as an organ scholar, has interned as an organ scholar at St. Paul's K Street, Washington, and the Church of the Advent, Boston, and is a member of OM. And our third panelist is Erika Takacs. Mother Takacs is rector of the Church of the Atonement, Chicago. Previously, she served as the associate rector at St. Mark's Church, Philadelphia, and at Christ Church, Alexandria, Virginia. First, as a clergy resident there in the Foundations for Spiritual Leadership program, and then as the associate rector for faith formation and evangelism. Before attending seminary, Mother Takacs was a high school and middle school chorus teacher in New Hope, Pennsylvania, and enjoyed a career as a singer specializing in early music. Mother Takacs is a member of OM and is a founding member of the Society of Catholic Priests in North America. Please know that the panelists here today in no way represent the full diversity of OM's membership or that of the church, but the PCDC feels that their particular stories can enrich our conversation about coaching to strengthen the church. Thank you all for being here today. Mr. Ritter, I will start with you. As a student of Marilyn Kaiser, you probably heard her quote the late Alec Wyden, who remarked that musicians are pastors, teachers, and performers in that order. The skills of pastors, teachers, and musicians are perhaps best learned by modeling. How have you seen this happen in your own experience, especially working with Dr. Kaiser?
Well, first off, good afternoon, Kyle, and everyone else. It's really great to be here. My connection, Murphy's Law being what it is a little wonky, so I'm praying that I hold on. I think to understand Marilyn's commitment to pastor, teacher, performer, which she certainly heard from Alec, her teacher, and she was his assistant at St. John the Divine, it's important to understand who her earlier mentors were, and that was her parents. She was very close to Oliver Kaiser, her father, who was a United Methodist minister. And she greatly admired him. They were very close. And she saw his commitment to nurturing Christian community and a life of service to others. Certainly in both her folks, but she was very close to her dad. Marilyn had that same fire in her at a very young age. She saw no difference really in the calling her father had as an ordained clergy person and her calling as a church musician. I believe that what has been on Marilyn's heart for the entirety of her career has been creating Christian community through music and instilling in her choir members a true sense of service to others in the choir, as well as those not in the choir, those who are sitting in the pew. I think that it was through Marilyn that I ever thought about a choir having a role as pastor and teacher to a congregation they served, which was certainly a very important part of her work. And I think that as a teacher to organ students as well, that was very much on her heart and mind, and tried to instill that in all of us who studied with her. And the notion that choirs are intentional Christian communities. They pray for each other, they support each other, and help each other on top of the singing that they do. Marilyn also has such a joy in her whole demeanor, and any of us who have been around her certainly see that in her, but especially in her work in the church. She and I were talking about the All Souls Choir at one point in her time there, and she smiled and said, "We had so much fun. We couldn't wait for Sunday morning." I think that one of the things that Marilyn most values in her work is knowing people. And I think this is really key. Knowing people's stories. She said in her dissertation that for liturgy and music to be truly effective, it must be honest. I think that includes a concern and involvement in the lives of the people in the community as well. And she's very interested in people's stories and where they come from, and what excites them about being in Christian community. I think her teaching and performing speak for themselves, really. I had a lesson with her in November that was on FaceTime. She sat right up on the music rack on my phone. And she was just as excited and exuberant and on top of it as she was 30 years ago when I was a student of hers. In fact, she heard every note I played, and it was great. It really was great. Her commitment to the highest level of performance, not only as a concert performer, but as a service player, is truly a model for what I strive to be.
Ritter, you now serve in the Diocese of Western North Carolina, which in the past sponsored a program that provided coaching and assistance to parishes in the diocese. And as a student of Dr. Kaiser, I imagine you heard a great deal about her work in that program when she held the post that you currently occupy. Could you tell us a little more about the benefits of that coaching program and what we might learn from that today?
So in preparation for today, I pulled out her dissertation, which is a 300-page document that she wrote for her doctorate at Union Seminary about her work as a consultant on music in the Diocese of Western North Carolina. Part of this dissertation was abridged in the 80s to about a 70-page book, Hymnal Studies 3, Teaching Music in Small Churches. I, for one, believe that this entire document should be published because it's a brilliant, brilliant study on teaching and coaching and mentoring on the diocesan level. She goes into great detail in this book. Anyway, just a quick background. Two clergy people in the Diocese of West North Carolina in 1970 dreamed of having a consultant on music and liturgy in the diocese. And she says here, the hiring of a resource person to aid local musicians to explore and develop local musical potential and to nurture in every church an indigenous form of musical activity. It was understood that this was to be a part-time position, allowing the consultant to serve All Souls Parish in Asheville as organist director of music. The parish was to fund approximately 2/3 of the salary and the diocese 1/3. They decided early on that they were not going to regulate exactly what 2/3 looked like in the parish and what 1/3 looked like in the diocese, and that was completely up to her. And her bishop, Bishop Henry, was very supportive. So she came really not having a blueprint. There was no diocesan music commission. There had never been in the diocese up to that point. And it really was up to her to sort of fashion this program. And so she had a little consultant group that helped her. They decided early on that she really should travel to the individual parishes and see people's local situations and experience those firsthand. She met people where they were, and I mean that both physical and philosophical. They decided very early on that if she was to travel to the parishes, as opposed to them coming to All Souls, which had a very different set of instruments and all of that. This comes back to her servant spirit, which I think Marilyn just exudes. She genuinely wanted to help folks based on the skills they had with no expectations. What she learned was that the music in the diocese was just as diverse as the people who were there. And it went from All Souls Parish in Asheville to little mountain parishes that had hammered dulcimers and folk violinists and different kinds of musicians. She wasn't trying to recreate All Souls in every person and parish she worked with. She was meeting them where they were. And that's Marilyn really desiring to know people's stories and their situations. Her work became invaluable because it was at the time of prayer book revision and hymnal revision as well. There were no musical settings of the contemporary liturgies that were coming out that eventually became our Rite 2 liturgies. And those were crafted while she was doing that work. She also served on the hymnal committee during that time. So she was bringing back a lot of material from those meetings that she was introducing to peoples in the parish. All over the diocese. So she worked with organists in teaching lessons. She worked with choirs. She did hymn festivals. She did diocesan gatherings. And all of that came because people began to trust Marilyn and knew that her work was genuine, that she wanted to know who they were, and that she really valued them for what they had to offer. So it was a remarkable program.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. And I hope maybe all of us will have a chance to read that dissertation. Maybe it can become available. What a wonderful resource. And we could spend hours and hours on this, but I do want to move on to our next panelist. So thank you very much, Kyle. We really appreciate your being with us today. I'll move on to you, Mr. Roberts. Thank you for being with us today. And you bring yet a different kind of experience to this discussion. You had the advantage very early on in your career of having some formative coaching experiences, some of which came through interning. Can you speak about the kinds of skills you gained, perhaps through osmosis, in those experiences?
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Father Babin, for having me. And thank you to the PCDC for having me. I'm really delighted and really honored. I think what I'm going to do is divide things into what we call hard skills, things like accompanying and an English crescendo, and then juxtapose that with soft skills, which for me took a lot longer to learn and had a lot more hiccups along the way. And that's things like being a supportive colleague or, being a pastor to your choir and your congregation while also maintaining healthy boundaries. But I really loved the word osmosis that you used, because I think you're right, Father Babin, that one really does learn a lot simply by being and watching and hearing. And thinking back to my time at St. Paul's, there were a lot of those osmosis moments. both the director there at the time and the assistant were really, really fabulous, exciting, thrilling hymn players. Um, and their particular orchestral style of playing was extremely effective on the gorgeous Schoenstein organ there. And it worked incredibly well in that particular room with that particular congregation that's so known for their robust hymn singing. Um, and so for me, sitting back and observing that and absorbing by osmosis was incredibly eye-opening to all of the different possibilities that existed in accompanying hymns. And so having learned elements of that style through osmosis, um, I wrongfully thought that it would be prudent to take that style back with me in my suitcase to Ohio, where I was living at the time. I had begun my undergraduate there. And so I took some of these ideas and this style, and I tried to transfer it to the parish where I was working, which had a 3-manual Holtkamp organ with no swell box and no real diapason tone, and mixtures coming out of your ears, and a very, very dry room. And so I attempted these things, and unsurprisingly, it did not work. It did not work even remotely. However, I was very fortunate at the time to have an amply experienced and eminently patient director there that provided a safe space for this little 19-year-old organist to experiment with these things and try out different ideas and different hard skills that he'd learned through osmosis. But then fast forwarding a few years, I had begun my work in Arkansas as the organist choir director at a parish there. And so I was equipped with this whole battery of hard skills, but I had yet to learn some of these soft skills that make someone really successful. Um, and I was quite young at the time, and I'm still very young. And I was also quite arrogant and thought that I knew everything about everything. And so naturally, I made a lot of mistakes when I was first beginning that job, and really my whole time there. But fortunately, in Little Rock, I had just the finest colleague in the world working right down the road from me at the Episcopal Cathedral. And despite my constantly pestering her and my general neediness, she never lost patience with me. And she always found the time to help me with this or that project. And at one point, she even actually twice let me bring my ragtag but dedicated group of volunteers to the cathedral to sing evensong one evening. And in return, she brought her fabulous cathedral choir over to my small parish to sing evensong. And things like that for me were really a lesson and remain a lesson in the importance and the value of being a supportive colleague to those around you. And so that's really one of those soft skills that I learned also through osmosis and by observing, that I've really tried to carry with me with gratitude for the example she showed.
That's great. I wonder if there's a particular instance in your time interning that would illustrate the value of coaching to you and how it's formed you in a particular way.
Well, sure. There's a particular example from the Church of the Advent that comes to mind. I had just showed up there as this little 18-year-old boy that had only recently discovered the Episcopal Church and only recently become introduced to its choral tradition. And so I had never seen or heard or smelled anything like what they do at the Church of the Advent. Um, and it was amazing. And so the director there wasted no time in putting me right to work with both playing and administrative duties. And it was after, a week or two that he said to me, "Well, fella, I think we're going to have you conduct on Sunday." And so there in his office, we got our little Ticonderoga pencils out, and I had my first conducting lesson, and we worked on conducting patterns and shaping phrases and cueing and different dynamics, and even what to do when the bass section inevitably drags. And so at that Thursday rehearsal, he gave me the leeway and the freedom to do basically whatever I wanted with this. I think it was a Josquin motet or something. And so, thinking back on that, it would have been a lot easier for all the parties involved if he had just said, fella, why don't you scoot over and watch how it's done? But he didn't do that. And I think it's because he knew the importance of trying things out for yourself. And my whole month there in Boston was really marked with moments like that, where, yes, it would have been easier and frankly a better musical product if he had done it himself instead of letting this 18-year-old green behind the ears boy do it, wet behind the ears rather. But he recognized the importance of allowing me to do it myself, and try out these various and sundry hard skills, and then receive feedback afterwards, either positive or negative, as the case may be.
Thank you. What I really appreciate about your experiences is that they happen very early in your career. And I think to me, it reinforces the importance of implementing coaching programs very early on when people are still students, so that they have much more time to process and to absorb those things maybe they learned by osmosis. So thank you. We could hear more and more again from you, Rees, but thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really wonderful to hear about your time in coaching. And finally, I'd like to conclude the discussion by moving to you, Mother Takacs. Thank you for being here today. And you bring yet another particular type of experience with coaching, yours as part of the clergy resident program at Christ Church Alexandria. And there you were involved with something that I know was very intentionally and obviously a learning experience. People knew that you were learning on the job, so to speak. I wonder if you can say a little more about this.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, thank you all I'm so glad to be here, and it's lovely to see you all. Always honored to be a part of a discussion at, so I was part of the clergy, the Foundations for Spiritual Development program at Christ Church and for spiritual leadership, which was very intentionally a 2-year program for clergy who had just graduated from seminary. So there was, and I arrived there when the program had been going for almost 10 years. So by the time I got there, there was a very clear understanding of what the congregation was doing by forming these new priests and then sending them out into the world. And so one of the things that I really found helpful in that program was that it was all out in the open. Everybody knew that we were new priests. Everybody knew that we were in this program of being intentionally mentored. And what that did was that it really normalized the kind of experiences that Rees was just talking about. It normalized feedback. It normalized the opportunity for people to try new things, to get up and try something. Try new ministry, start new things. It normalized the process of when those things need adjustments or when they just don't work. And there was something really freeing about that. It normalized seeing new clergy, and one could extend this to, I mean, I was a teacher before I was a priest. So, new teachers, new music directors, new organist choir masters, new clergy as continuing learners. And that, what the effect for me was profound, in that it allowed me to grow in ways that I don't think I would have been able to had I not had that kind of safe, I think Rees used that word, sort of safe space, if I hadn't had that sort of structure of support around me. But the side benefit of it, well, not the side benefit, I think it was a core benefit of it, was that the congregation then saw themselves as teachers. They saw themselves as people who were in the process of forming new clergy. And as I said, by the time I got there, the program had been running for long enough that the congregation was really quite savvy in how they did that. I mean, they really owned that as part of who they were, which was a wonderful pairing there, to have a congregation that was able to see themselves as being a part of the formation of new clergy, and that they took that on as part of their own vocation. It changed them as well, and grew leadership in the congregation because of that. So I loved the way that stating it out loud we are being mentored. We are part of we are interns, we are residents, we are learning here, allowed for a kind of claiming of identity as learner, as teacher, as people who are engaged together in the process of forming new clergy, musicians, teachers, sort of fill in the blank. So that freedom and that was really a delight. It was a delightful atmosphere to be a part of.
To me, that emphasizes the role of the church in doing this. And I wonder if you might say a little bit about how the church could continue to work to strengthen such programs and the importance perhaps of weigh in from the church, even say at the diocesan level, not just at the parish level.
Sure. Well, I think as we heard Mother Crafton talking about before, if our job as leaders in the church is to help human beings to become their best selves, right? To help human beings become the children that God has made them to be, then it seems to me that programs like this that function across the board for leadership in the church are really important. Kyle, you and I talked about the fact that the church, and you mentioned it in your intro, the church as a structure seems to be on board with the fact that clergy need this mentoring. And as you said, many diocesan systems have Fresh Start programs. Many of us have been through Fresh Start programs again and again and again, which are wonderful. Primarily for me, they've been wonderful in the opportunity to get to know my fellow clergy and also to connect with a mentor, connect with a coach in the diocese, someone that you know that you can call to say, hey, can I process this with you? And there are a couple of things about that style of coaching that I think are really important. And these are actually some of the key learnings that came from the FSL program at Christ Church, which was part of a larger program called the Transitions into Ministry program, which was sponsored by the Lilly Foundation, which was a national program. And one of the key takeaways that they took away, one of the key learnings that they took away from this was that cohorts are helpful. So having a group around you as you're being coached is really helpful. I learned as much about myself as a priest and as a person from the people who went through this program with me as I did from my coaches. So if there's a way for musician coaching programs to be shaped so that there's some connection laterally as well between different people who are all in sort of a similar position in their careers, I feel like that would be that might be something that could be continued in the music field as it is with clergy as well. The other thing that was so wonderful about the Transitions into Ministry program is that they were proactive in reaching out to people to say, hey, why don't you participate in this program? I was approached by the rector of Christ Church at the time to say, I think this could be a good program for you. I don't know that I would have thought of it on my own. And the Transitions into Ministry program really focused on that as a part of the program. How do we reach out to people to invite them into this? And it seems to me that is a really helpful way to think about coaching, as opposed to, here's a new person already in a new job that's demanding a lot of them. And now we're asking them to find a coach, right? Fresh Start programs are not optional. They're mandatory for a reason. They're mandatory because the diocese is saying, hey, this kind of mentoring and coaching when you're in a new position or when you're a new priest, we found that it's helpful. So we're going to ask you to do that. And it seems to me that it might be a helpful framework to think about as we seek to expand the opportunities for coaching within the Episcopal Church in music, is to say, how can we reach out to people and say, this is available, would you like to participate? Because what happens when you do that is then you start to get people like me who I found that experience to be life-changing. And it makes me want to help mentor other people as much as I can, as much as I'm able, as much as I have the capacity for. And when good coaching creates people who want to be good coaches. That's just good for it's good for the church and it's good for the world. So anyway, that's a little bit about my experience. I hope that might be a little helpful.
Immensely helpful. Thank you so much. And we are out of time now, but I'm grateful to all of you. I hope this is good food for thought. And thank you. And please do reach out to the PCDC if you need assistance. And it's been great to have all of you panelists here today, Kyle, Erika, and Rees. Thank you.
Thank you to Kyle Babin and our panelists, Kyle Ritter, Erika Takacs, and Rees Roberts. And a special thanks to Marilyn Kaiser, and we hope that you're recuperating well.